and get started. So, welcome back, everyone. I trust that you have done what you need to do. Uh, you're all adults, so you can come and go as you need to attend to whatever it is that you need to do. I'm excited to have another Tracy because we had another Tracy this morning. So, this is like the Tracy's takeover. Um, to have my friend and colleague, Reverend Tracy Smith, join us as we talk about intergenerational ministry. So we know it's great for children and youth to have their own things, but we learn best when we are in community with one another. So Tracy has been doing it much longer than the job that she has now. But I will allow her to introduce herself, tell you more about the project she's working on, and to lead us through our time together.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracy. And Tracy, you gave me the keys to your Zoom so I can drive it. So thank you for that. And also, um, to the point of being Tracy's, when Tracy Potter and I were working together on an event, there was some meetings where the person we were working with was just getting annoyed with, not annoyed, but she was just started referring to us as Smith and Potter, which I really appreciated because it was just like, well, Tracy, and then and it's just like Smith will do this and then Potter will do this. And so that was really fun. Okay, I think I'm gonna stop and reshare my screen because it said it was paused and I was like, I don't know what that means even. So I'm gonna try again. Take two on the screen sharing. Okay, here we go. You've been signed out. What is this business? Oh, it does this all the time. Okay, sorry. Take two. Here we go. Just kidding. Just kidding. Okay. Guys, this is so scary. Here we go. You can see it, right? It says integration. Okay. I won't bore you with all of my screen sharing mishaps of late, but there have been some bad ones. Okay. So intergenerational ministry, we're going to talk today about what it is and how to use it and all of the things. These slides are for you all, and I'm going to give them to Tracy after this for her to send out to you. I would appreciate it if you don't publish them on the internet, just for lots of reasons. So hi, my name is Tracy Smith. I am a pastor, an ordained pastor. I'm very new to my role as program director of Family Faith Every Day. So you maybe hear that in my talking when I say I'm a pastor, because I've said that for so many years and I still am a pastor. I'm not serving in a church right now. And I'm going to tell you a bit about my job and what I do because it's very relevant to what we're talking about today. Um, I'm the author of all of these books. The first one, Faithful Families, is the one that probably people know the most. Although when I'm out in the world, I'm finding that people know the Christmas book, maybe more than some of the other ones. But all of my books are around how to incorporate faith into everyday family life. I call them recipe books because they're books where you're not necessarily meant to just read it start to finish. You're meant to find an activity, figure out what you want to do with your family, and then do that faith at home activity at home in your family. So that's what all of the books are about. Now, today, since we're talking about intergenerational ministry, I'm going to show you how to use my books in an intergenerational context. That's not what they were designed for, but you can use them that way very easily. And I'm going to show you how to do that, but they are written for family at home use. And so I'd be curious to know if any of you have used them and what you think of how to use them both at home and in family use. My work right now is directing Family Faith Every Day. Family Faith Every Day is a program that is funded by the Lilly Endowment's Christian Parenting and Caregiving Initiative. You may have heard about this initiative. There's about 150 grants around the country that are working together with Christian parenting and caregiving. There's another initiative around young children in worship. So there's just a lot of energy right now around young children in worship and Christian parenting through a lot of organizations that have received these grants. My grant, Family Faith Every Day, is being hosted by Chalice Media Group, Chalice Press, who published 3 of my books. And that grant is around helping parents to incorporate family faith at home. So our mission is to create a world in which families can grow together in their faith and their love through daily faith practices across generations. So one of the reasons I talk a lot about intergenerational relationships in the church is that families are intergenerational relationships. So a lot of the research and the things that I've learned about family faith formation also apply broadly in the church. And as Tracy said, I was doing intergenerational ministry in my own congregation for many, many years. There's a lot of overlap between the faith at home world and the intergenerational ministry world. So I speak to both. So today we're going to talk about what intergenerational ministry is, why it matters, and I'm planning to spend the bulk of my time with you all on how to do it, because I know that those practical tips and ideas are the most important for you. I was telling Tracy, there's a lot in this webinar. I might feel like I'm just flying through. You might feel like we're flying. I just want to cover a whole lot of material. So buckle in. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and Tracy will fish them out either for today if we happen to have time at the end, or if we find that we want to follow up in some way, we can find those questions for you. Okay, so here we go. So what is intergenerational ministry? To understand intergenerational ministry, it's helpful to understand maybe what it is not. So multi-generational, right? So let's think of these little Legos as the different generations. You've got your alphas, your Gen Zs, your millennials, your boomers, your little kids, your teenagers. A multi-generation space is where generational space is where those generations are they're interacting together and there's some superficial and polite interaction. So all these Legos, everybody is like with their little group and they're existing in the same space. That would be a multi-generational place. And you have a cross-generational community, right? There's some listening and sharing, but little individual or collective transformation, right? So maybe all of our generations are kind of jumbled together and we're talking together, we're sharing together, we're listening together, but we're not being transformed by one another. And then an intergenerational space is this kind of space. There's comprehensive mutuality, equality, and reciprocity. That's the key word, in my opinion, about intergenerational spaces that makes individual or collective transformation more likely. So it's not a space where, yes, there are older and younger kids, all sorts of generations together, and we kind of talk and chat. A truly intergenerational space is a space where we're expecting to learn and be transformed by one another. And this is true in my work and ministry as I study faith at home. One of the things that is coming out of our research is this idea that parents and children are influencing each other's faith reciprocally. So in my work, it's not that parents are teaching children faith and then they're the open containers that receive it. It's that this family unit is growing and being changed together. And I could tell you plenty of stories from my own work and research around how that is true in a family and church concept or context. And I am sure that you have stories like this as well. You know, times where the Sunday school teacher thinks that they're the teacher and they actually find their own faith being changed by the children and vice versa. So that's what we're getting at when we're talking about the intergenerational space. I think a couple slides ago I showed, I'm going to just go back because I can't. This Dr. Dave Sinnes is the researcher for Family Faith Every Day. He is my good friend and colleague, and he is the one that provided these slides for us. He's the author of the book, A Gospel for All Ages, and that's a book that talks about intergenerational preaching. And I would highly commend that to you, especially if you are a preacher occasionally or regularly in your church context. So other features of intergenerational ministry, as I said, there's mutual sharing and learning. It's not just one directional. We value others in an intergenerational context. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in terms of some practical ways that we do that. But difference is not seen as a bug, it's seen as a feature, it's seen as something that we embrace and want to see. An intergenerational context is one that is by definition very inclusive and accommodating. We know that what works for one group doesn't work for everyone. And so we're constantly trying to seek to adjust and balance. And we see this in sort of, if we think about intergenerational worship, right? In order to make an inclusive space for children, we might have some features of that that automatically feel like they're less inclusive for older adults. Maybe littles are really liking lots of movement and loud noises. And then we have others in our space that are preferring the exact opposite. So how do we create a space when those needs seem to be conflicting against one another is something that I talk about a lot. Intergenerational worship and intergenerational spaces, we're not just talking about grown-ups and children. And this is something that my friend Chris in Australia talks about all the time. An intergenerational space also values the connection and the relationships between maybe adults in their 40s and adults in their 80s. What are the differences there? Adults in their 20s and adults in their 80s. I just had a coffee meeting with somebody at a very different stage in life than mine, and it was very life-giving. And this was not a child, this is a different grown-up. So don't count out different generations within adulthood when you're talking about intergenerational ministry. Okay, so why? Why do we care about intergenerational ministry? The first thing I wanted to put out for you all to consider today, there's so many reasons to think about intergenerational ministry, but to think about this idea of the third space in society right now. Churches, as we decline in membership and become less relevant, our difference really sticks out. And I'd love for you to think about what third spaces there are in society right now, places that are not home and work. If you think about a space that's not home and work, we have libraries, we have coffee shops, and then we have churches. And I love coffee shops, don't get me wrong, I love libraries, but I don't have any meaningful interaction with the folks in my library and my coffee shop, and I do in the church, and I have my whole life. And that sort of brings me to a story that I wanted to tell you. I forgot to mention at the beginning that I am a Presbyterian minister. And I grew up in the UCC. So the United Church of Christ is very close to my heart. You're probably looking at that like, what is that salad? What is she getting to? That's like so weird and bizarre. I'm getting there. I try, I promise. Um, in my United Church of Christ church growing up, we had the Logos program. I don't know if any of you know about Logos. It is now Gen On Ministries, which is still an amazing intergenerational ministry that I would highly commend to you. And Logos ministry, I'm going to actually walk you through a way to do intergenerational events that's very similar to the format of Logos. But it was a program, a midweek program that was intergenerational. I'm 46, so this is back in my day, as my kids like to say. This was back when I was a kid, so in the 80s. And it wasn't called intergenerational anything, but it truly was. We had a time of eating and then a time of learning together. I'm going to walk you through that in just a minute. But when I was a middle schooler in my Logos program, intergenerational, during my activities center, there was a woman named Mrs. Hawes, and she was in charge of the cooking. Okay. And every time I talk about Mrs. Hawes, I get choked up. I've told this story so many times, I cry almost every single time. But Mrs. Hawes, like, just loved us. Like, she loved us middle schoolers. And she could not have been more detached from the actual needs of middle schoolers. She was not cool. She was not trendy. She didn't know anything about our lives, but she loved us. And for this little cooking class that she did, one of the things she did was this Raggedy Ann salad. And as you can see, it is from the Betty Crocker cookbook in the 1950s. It looks very creepy. There is a boiled egg for the head. There is an orange in this one. Hers was a canned peach out of the can. The skirt is that lettuce leaf. I'm telling you, is there anything that looks less relevant than this? Even in the 80s, this looked old-fashioned. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. And it wasn't the salad, it was Mrs. Hawes, and it was that relationship. It was that person that was like, let me show you this thing. And we were so into it. It changed my life. Mrs. Hawes changed my life. And that's the encouraging story that I want to tell you when you think about creating moments for children and adults or different generations to get together. It's not about what they're doing, it's the love and intention behind it. And in fact, sometimes the more irrelevant it is, the more magical it can be. And I guess, sort of a side note, I wish I had a picture of this, but I looked on the internet for one and I couldn't find it. We did a vacation Bible school a couple of summers ago in my church, and one of the adults was showing the children how to take corn on the cob and like put mud over it in its husk and then roast it in the mud. I've never seen this before. I have no idea where it comes from. The adult that was teaching the kids how to do this said that it was something that he learned in scouting like, 40 years ago. My kids still talk about that. They still talk about it. It was so different to them. It was so magical. It was beautiful. They cared about that more than anything else at Sunday school. So for me, the why is, where else in life do you have those kinds of interactions? Where, outside of family, where else are you going to have those kinds of spaces? I would invite you to think about, what's your why for intergenerational ministry? What moves you about trying to get different generations together, and to think about that. So when we think about putting our why at the center, I if I was brave, I would have started with those stories for intergenerational ministry. I wanted to start with the what so that we all were oriented to what we're talking about. But if you're not clear on why you want to do intergenerational ministry, or why you would want to implement some of the things that I'm about to tell you about, I would say don't do it. Be clear on why this is important to you before you embark on any sort of intergenerational experiment, because if you do that, you will definitely it will help you to orient your work. And by the way, that's Simon Sinek, who has a book called Find Your Why, or he calls this the golden circle, where the why is at the center and the how and the what come next. So how? This is where I am going to spend the rest of our time. We have about 25 minutes, so I'm going to be flying through a bunch of hows for intergenerational ministry. And again, I invite you to follow up with me if there's anything that's not clear. So how to do intergenerational worship in your space? Choose liturgies that have repeated elements. I think this is one of the easiest ways for worship, intergenerational worship. I always look for a refrain that is repeated. So what psalm is that? I forget which psalm it is. Somebody knows, you can put it in the chat, but your steadfast love endures forever. You just open up your Bible to that psalm, and that can be your intergenerational call to worship. You start by saying, blah, blah, blah. And then when I go like this, your steadfast love endures forever. This is really inclusive for children, and then also people that are not reading in your space because of those repeated elements. Creative prayer stations within the service is a great way to add intergenerational opportunities, things that are tactile, things that you can touch and move and see. And for this, I would send you right here to Teresa Cho and her intergenerational worship page. I won't take a lot of time to walk you through all of her different ideas, but she has so many different services, places where you can come forward and, drop your stones in the water, pick up your flowers, all of these things that we've seen in worship, these kind of creative magical worship moments. She just is a treasure trove of those resources. Again, I want to refer you to Dave's book, Gospel for All Ages, to try and help you reimagine your preaching moment. The sermon does not have to be just a traditional manuscript preaching, and he gives ideas for that. In my world, people talk about playgrounds a lot. And maybe some of you have heard this or you have it. The idea of a playground is sort of setting apart your space in worship for children. And this is a picture of the original one. I believe the person who came up even with the term playground is somebody that I know named Andrea. It got a lot of national press. I think this was on Good Morning America. People have gone crazy with playgrounds, and I think that they're wonderful and also limited. And I am not at all throwing shade on this playground or anybody's playground space, but I would love for you to consider back to that Lego imagery that I showed you a few minutes ago. With intergenerational ministry, we're trying to have people informed and learning from one another and mutually transformed and changed. And I think that sometimes playgrounds are a way to have a certain generation just doing the same thing that we're doing in a different space. They're not necessarily an intergenerational space. And so if that's fine, and if you know that and that's what you're trying to go for, just when it comes to intergenerational ministry, playgrounds can just be a way of kind of coexisting rather than working together and experiencing and learning from one another. So more on that in a different topic. I would love for you to consider, whoa, hang on. Oh, I know why that happened. It's because there was a link in that shoot. So hang on. Here we go. I need to not click on that. Stand by. Happened the last time I did the same presentation. Will she ever learn? Okay. So I'd love for you to consider toys that allow children to play church instead of having a playground. Or if you do, or if you already have a playground, put this in it. Toys that help children to do church while they're in church, right? Like little communion toys, little child-sized stoles so that they can put on the stole like the pastor, little candles so they can light the candle while we're having worship. So it's not like, hey, we have a space in worship where you can play, but hey, well, you can, but what you're playing is actually what we're doing. And I think that is a way to actually start to think about doing intergenerational worship. That link that I just took you on a little rabbit trail down is to this store, Shining Light Dolls. If anybody would like to create a Protestant version of this, I would love to know about it so I can put it in these webinars. But Shining Light Dolls is a Catholic store, but it's a great place to get some of these toys. And also a little hack as a woman minister. If you use the Mary doll, you can, and if you buy the Mary doll and buy the priest doll, you can take the clothes from the priest doll and put on the Mary doll so that you have a woman pastor. You cannot buy a woman pastor at Shining Light Dolls, but that's my little hack for you. Okay, I would also love for you to consider bright and interactive worship aids for all ages. So a big basket of toys, of musical toys that all ages can use. Again, this is not a basket of toys that's just for children. This is a basket of musical instruments for all ages, anybody that would like them. And then these ribbon wavers, I think, are a huge practical thing to use to make your worship space intergenerational. You'll see that X through those ribbon wand ones. And that is from personal experience. I had those in my congregation and they ended up being used as weapons and all kinds of do not negative on that. I would also love to encourage you to consider alternative seating. Label it for what it is and not who it's for. I'm going to talk about that a second in the next slide. But I was in a congregation many years ago that had recliners in the back. It happened because one congregant had need for it, and they were going to put it in temporarily, and then it ended up being, like many things, for older adults, they end up also being very attractive to children. And I think as you think about your intergenerational spaces, I would love for you to consider that truth, that what makes a space accessible for a wheelchair or a walker is also going to make your space accessible for young children. And a chair like this that might be for an older adult is also very comfy for a child or a nursing mother. So try to not limit yourself by labeling what a space or a chair is for. So don't say this is the nursing mothers section, like this is the lazy boy section, right? And let people decide who needs it, right? I love quiet books. If you Google quiet books, this is a tradition that started in, I think the Church of Latter-day Saints has a large tradition of quiet books. These are beautiful, sewn books that have sort of a Montessori approach. They're very complicated to make. If you look on Etsy, the patterns you can buy, find somebody in your congregation that can make these quiet books for you. It is a beautiful way. And again, marketed for young children, also very good for folks with memory loss or people that need some sort of tactile experience in your worship space. So I just said this, but it's worth repeating. Consider labeling things according to what they are, not who they are for. Another example of this, there's lots of talk and sometimes like with great passion about how we should label our bathrooms, how should we label them so that they are accommodating to any gender. Just label what's in there. It's a restroom. There's a picture of a urinal if it's in there, and if there's one in there, and if there's not a picture of a urinal, and let people decide what they need, what equipment they need in there. That's a whole other soapbox that I won't get into. Same thing with nursing rooms and sensory rooms. Just call them quiet rooms and let people decide if they need them. Okay, I told you this was going to fly by. Only have 15 minutes left. So I'm going to take you through how to do some intergenerational moments. And I'm going to use ideas in Lent and Easter, mostly Lent, because I felt like you all probably have your Advent mostly planned. If you don't, here's some last minute ideas. And I'm using my Faithful Families for Christmas and Easter and Faithful Families for or Christmas and Advent and Lent and Easter as kind of guides for you. So for Advent and Christmas, um, acts of kindness tree. So in the book, the idea that I give is for you to have a little branch or Christmas tree with little ornaments for acts of kindness that can be done and invite people to take those different ornaments off and do them. I also just read, though, recently a book that talked about this idea of having a kindness journal where you record acts of kindness that you have seen people do out in the world. And I loved that idea. So if I was going to do an acts of kindness tree this year, I think I would have blank ornaments and I would write on it acts of kindness that I've witnessed out in the world. And I'd put that on my tree. And I think that could be a wonderful thing for your congregations this year. Invite them to observe acts of kindness that they see in the world and put them on their tree rather than something that you have to do. All you have to do is notice kindness in your world, in other words. Ornament stories is one of my favorites. Inviting people of all ages to bring their favorite ornament to church and telling a story about it. It's very, very easy, but you can build an entire moment out of that. Advent workshop. This is also from my childhood in my little UCC church. We had an Advent workshop where you could make little ornaments. The one I love telling this story that I was making a little ornament with like a little piece of tin, and then you had uh, a nail and a hammer to make like little holes. That would definitely not necessarily fly. I just can't imagine many children's ministers I know that are going to send kids loose with hammers and nails, but they did when I was a kid and it was amazing. But whatever you want to do for ornament making or just those times of getting all generations together to make ornaments. I would love for you to consider doing an intergenerational pageant. So many of us have children's pageants, and if our churches are in decline, we're lamenting the fact that there are no children, but let's do the pageant anyway with the children that we have and put grown-ups in the other positions. Okay, for Lent and Easter, I'm going to walk you through how to do intergenerational events with this block format. And again, we're going to be going kind of quickly. But an intergenerational block format for an intergenerational event, whether it's Lent, Easter, Christmas, whenever you want to do it, um, the blocks that I would invite you to consider, if you wanted to do the whole evening or the whole after church thing, all of the blocks would be a food block, a stations block, a worship block, a story time block, hands-on activity and learning, right? And so this would just be a schedule example, just for those of you that like to know exactly how we would plan this, right? So you would have from 6 to 6:30, you would have stations, then you would have dinner, then you would have an all ages story or lesson, then you could have creative prayer, activity, and dismissal. Option number two, have people eat first, send them into worship, do a hands-on activity, do a closing prayer, right? So you can do this any way you want. And if you know the blocks and what you're putting in each block, you can organize it any way you want to. I know some of you don't like need this level of detail and some of you do. So hopefully put yourself wherever it works for you. So the food block, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this because you can figure it out, except to say this is a huge gift to intergenerational ministry, I think. In my Logos program growing up, I was put at a table with other kids and parents, but not my own parents. And I think that was such a gift. Again, I could get all weepy about it, thinking about what a gift that was to me to be at a table with table parents that were not my own parents. And what a gift it was for those table parents to have these kids eating with them. And I would love for churches to try this out more and to really encourage it. There's something magical about it for both the kids and the parents. The kids behave better sometimes. The table parents are not as annoyed with the kids about the things that their regular parents are. So um, I think making food that you can assemble together is a great way to foster intergenerational community. Taco bars, pizza bars, baked potato bars, like all of those opportunities to get kids and adults making their food together. Food is part of the thing for this vision, right? Sometimes when we're creating our events, we're like, well, we got to eat. So we're like, instead of thinking like this is part of what we're trying to do. I hope that's also affirming to you if you're like, oh, we don't do any intergenerational ministry. It's like, well, do you have like a soup supper or do you have a potluck? Does everybody come? Okay, that's an intergenerational event, right? Like we don't have to overthink this stuff. Church has been doing potlucks for a long time. Okay, so your stations block. Again, I'm showing you ideas from this book in part because I was thinking that it would help you all to get a jump start on your Lenten planning if you're sitting here thinking about what are we going to do? Or you can just take notes and when it's time for Lent, do it then. You can have a planting station, creating a garden. Is there a better metaphor for Lent and Easter than planting and growing a garden? There is not, I say. Prayer, one of my passions, and you'll find this in all of my activities, is to try and steer children, youth, and families leaders away from activities that are going to create more waste and stuff to throw away. There's so many little kits and things through like, Michael's and Target and Oriental Trading and things like that, but they create so much waste. And I can tell you as a parent and also, working with churches all around the country, um, it's something to think about. And especially, the UCC is very committed to ecological justice, and it's an important thing to consider. So that all of that soapbox to say, this make a candle station is very eco-friendly. You can buy little wax sheets and then cut out little shapes of wax and then put them on wax candles. It's like a huge hit. People love it. Um, have a service station where people can make little blessing bags for organizations in your community. And then simplifying. Oh, these are the 3 pillars of Lent, by the way: service, simplifying, and prayer. So instead of reading screens, what if we are going to have a time of poetry during our Lenten season? What if we could encourage people to enjoy nature instead of being busy? You could have a prayer journal decorating station. You could have an art station with prompts such as things I'm grateful for. Praying in color station. I don't know if you know praying in color, but that's Sybil Macbeth. So many beautiful ideas from her. So again, that prayer, service, and simplifying are meant to represent the 3 pillars of Lent, which the 3 pillars of Lent traditionally are prayer, fasting, and acts of service. In my book, I talk about fasting as simplifying because I think for young children, number one, we shouldn't be fasting when we're a young child, and also it avoids any concern about disordered eating. Your worship block. I'm just trying to give you a very clear roadmap. Have an opening psalm, a few simple songs that are easy for all ages with no hymnals. One of my favorites is God is So Good, the doxology. I don't know if you have any UCC specific ones, the Gloria Patri, maybe. Simple message. One of the symbols for resurrection eggs. If you know resurrection eggs, there's a redone version of it in my Lenten Easter book that avoids, like, I always thought it was creepy that there was these 12 eggs to tell the story for children. And then it's like, you're opening these eggs and it's like, here's a tiny whip and a tiny crown of thorns. And like, it's very violent and not appropriate for small children. So there's a redone version of that in my book. And then you can talk about a ritual for the Lenten season that you could practice all of you together. It could be hand washing. You could make a heart on each other's hands with water. You could practice passing the peace together and then end with a closing prayer. So that's your worship block. And then your story time block, if you had that. These are some great Easter stories that I recommend. I'm flying through this, guys, because we only have 8 minutes left. There you go. Hands-on activities. These are some of my favorite for Easter. Compost station. Compost is one of my favorite metaphors of all time, turning our regrets into compost, right? Like what happens when you have regrets? They turn into this rich, deep soil. Butterflies, I have done this so many times to order those caterpillars at the beginning of Lent and they become butterflies. So for that hands-on activity, it's like decorating a butterfly or learning about butterflies. Prisms and light, you can buy the little rainbow prisms on Amazon. This is one exception I make to my buying stuff rule because they're so cool. Showing kids how prisms reflect light. Whoops. I need to stop embedding links into my presentations. There we go. But now you can not see it the right way. So sorry, kids. That is a link to a Pinterest board that I have it's called Visual Leadership, and it's basically just a Pinterest board of tons and tons of images that you can use for stuff like this. Here we go. Compost, butterflies, presumably. Okay. Creative prayer block. I'm just going to fly through these. These are all different kinds of creative prayers in my Lenten Easter book, which we're not going to have time to go through. Okay, general pet peeves and soapboxes about generational ministry for you. Don't invite people to an intergenerational event. Like that's so jargony. Like, so now you've gone to this workshop, or maybe you already know a lot about intergenerational ministry and you're like, I'm fired up. I want to do an intergenerational event. Do not say, come to our intergenerational Easter event. It just sounds so jargony. So come up with a name for this thing. A lot of people use lift or loft, living in faith together, loving our faith together, whatever you want to call it. Just say, come to a soup supper and we'll do churchy stuff. Like, you don't have to tell them exactly what all of your plans are. Um, Try to simplify. I mean, again, guys, we've been flying for the last 45 minutes, but if you've if you work with me for any period of time, you'll know that one of my soapboxes for children, youth, and families and associate pastors that work in this space is that you all spend so much time doing and creating and putting things together. And it's a beautiful service to the church. And also, I'm begging you to try and simplify as much as you can. Get help. Part of what will help the church grow and is helping the church grow is when our lay leadership really takes ownership of some of these things. So if you were to do that whole block thing that I just taught you, um, have one volunteer take each block that's not you, right? So you are only in charge of one of those blocks. Um, and then put on your intergenerational glasses and look at everything that you do through this lens of trying to accommodate different generations and having generations work together. So I wanted to end, do as I say, not as I do, with this thought about slowing down. This book, When Church Stops Working by Andrew Root and Blair Bertrand, is such a beautiful one. It's a little bit, um, it's of their book, of Andrew's books. It's the more accessible one, but it is a pretty hefty, meaty book. Um, and their whole theory is that the church, in order to sort of stave off decline, we've started getting really hyper. And instead of slowing down and waiting and listening to the spirit. And so I wanted to end with that. You know, I've thrown a lot of information at you, but as you're thinking about like what kind of church do we want to be? What kind of moment do I want to create for the generations in my congregation? I would encourage you to take a moment and to take just some time, maybe an hour, maybe a weekend out of your day to pray about it, to ask God what is next for all of the generations. It's not about doing more, it's about doing different things with a great deal of purpose. So again, this is the bibliography. I sent it to Tracy already. Thanks to Dave, my partner and friend, for putting that together. And thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you. We only have a couple minutes. So if there is a question, maybe Tracy, that has gone into the chat that we want to talk about, or if there's a question that you have that you want to put in the chat or talk, I would love to take it. And I would also love to stay connected. That's my newsletter. It's tracysmithsubstack.com. It's called Treasure Box Tuesday. Every week on Tuesdays, I send out an email list. That's free. There is a premium thing, but it is not this. So the free one is what you want. It has just like every week I send out 5 links. So all of the books that were mentioned here at some time or other were featured in Treasure Box Tuesday. It's a resource list for children, youth, and families leaders. And I mean, not because I'm trying to promote myself. I think I do really believe in all of the stuff that's in there. So I would encourage you to sign up for that. And thank you to Tracy Potter for inviting me. And I'm sorry I was doing so much stuff. Hope that you're not sweating like, oh Lord.
Thank you, Tracy. We've got about 2 minutes. Were there any questions that didn't make it to the chat that someone feels like I really need this answered today?
You no burning questions.
Let's see, something just popped up.
Somebody was asking if they'll get a copy of the slides, and I'm happy to share those with Tracy with the hope and expectation that you just kind of keep them for your own personal use.
So we will get an email out probably Friday morning, with all the links and resources and things that have been mentioned, over our 2 days together. So you can expect that towards the end of the week.
Yay.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you to all of you friends. I see some familiar names and faces, and it's just thank you to all of you for your good work. I am so blessed every time and I see all of your thank yous coming through, and you are so welcome. It is my pleasure. I love to visit you all. I am outside of Chicago, and yeah, just stay in touch. And I love to hear stories about what's worked. So if you want to send me emails and tell me about your favorite intergenerational things, that's what I pass it on to other people of our learnings. So yay. Good. Well, good to see all of you. And thanks again, Tracy. Good luck. I hope, is this the end of your conference now?
Yeah, we're going to be wrapping up here.
Okay. Awesome. Well, good. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Um, as we prepare to end our time together, Tyler and I started off with kind of our hopes and dreams that there were connections that would be made, that you would have some additional tool that you were walking away with for your toolbox, um, that you know that you are not in this work alone and that it matters. We know that children's and youth and faith formation is not always the highest priority or the biggest budget in a lot of our local congregations, but the work is important. And it's not about making sure our youth can pay tithes or even the membership that we sometimes think is the most important part of the church. But it's about being faithful in our discipleship. That's why we do the work that we've been called to do. Like I said, you will get an email by the end of the week that has all of the resources that have either been shared on screen, mentioned in the chat. Some of you private messaged me with, can we share this? And there may be additional things that you're holding and you just didn't get an opportunity to get those shared. Know that I will take whatever it is you have that you want the rest of the group to know, so that we can continue the work and not have to recreate the wheel like we often do in children's and youth ministry. So I am grateful that, you know, from our Hawaii people who joined at 4 a.m. To those who I know are sitting at regular 9 to 5 jobs, so that you were jumping in and out so that you could get a little bit of information to help you do this job. I see you and I value your time and your yes and your commitment to making a difference in children and youth ministry. I'm still not able to share sound, which is a whole nother issue, but it is par for the course. So I've asked Tracy Howe if they will share kind of our closing worship as we prepare to depart from this place.
Thank you so much, Tracy and Tracy. And so I first wanted to just present some reflection questions for you all, and I invite you to type in the chat. The first is, who was your favorite Tracy today that presented? Please put that in the chat. I'm just kidding.
My feelings might be hurt if it's not me.
We love we we love all the Tracys, and I'm so grateful to work with Tracy Potter. She is so committed and faithful and fierce in this work in advocating for you all, actually, just in our church at wide. So thank you, Tracy. I invite you to offer a word of gratitude, and there's no wrong or right, obviously, but just to build the chat with something that is close in your heart and mind right now. Could have been brought up directly about what you're learning, or just something greater in your life. You know, we're whole people when we come into these spaces. But I invite you to type a word of gratitude as we start to create this offering of worship. Fellowship, yes, yes. Community is so important. I love what I love the differentiation between just kind of pushing people into the same room and saying, okay, we're all here, we're multi-generational, versus really that expectation to learn and grow together. And that is so applicable to every space that we go into, I think. So absolutely inspirational. Yeah, full of spirit. Ideas in a new way, resources, hearing new ideas. Mhm. And as you continue to fill this space with gratitude, now I invite you to now think of specific children, and that can be specific children in a city or a church or a specific child, first name only, and put that into the chat, and just let's call in the spirit of this embodiment of God's love in action that we know through children that are called to the same things that we are called to learn and grow with and shape and remember who we are given to love, and ask God to show us how to love the people and how to love the children. I live in southern Arizona, so I've been thinking about migrant children. Hmm. Yeah. Trans youth, yes. Mhm. And as we fill our hearts and minds with these offerings of gratitude, as well as a remembrance of why we're in this work, I offer this reflection to you.
And here, do your ears ring with sibilant song of aha? Does your throat choke with hope for no reason your eye can see? Are you the morning star at midnight, cloaked in a silent shiver? This is the bray of every hound at full moon. This is the blood pound in the hurting heart. This is the throb of wide open nostril, the liberation of fecundation, the destination of squeal, the call of wild mountains, the prowl of owl through a single eyeball. This is what every fault line is trying to slip towards. This is thrust of the Himalaya when the clouds are too wet. Do you think Earth never shouts hallelujahs without your consent? This is homecoming, like Adam banging his head on the grave lid of time, like Eve on the rise, like Jesus in disguise of Moses calling Elijah back out of the chariot. This is the second coming of Genesis. Discovering every locked door is simply in the head. And the ultimate judge of evil is your grandmother climbing up off her deathbed. This is the nonsense of justice. Like the other world breaking into this one without announcement or invitation, like every pain had a balm, every desire a future, every burnt land a new seed, sowing soft wetness into its clay. Every slave release and quadruple compensation plus interest. Every hope a new life. Every vision redemption. Every tear a bottle and a loving eye counting. Every starving mouth a barn full of bread. Every stranger a house of welcome. Every Comanche, a new herd of buffalo. Every Jew, a new Muslim sister. Every Chicano, a new order, destroying all borders. Every Black and brown trans woman, freedom from violence. Every child with disabilities, accessibility to lead. Every Black American, public space to be anything, including Black. Every white American, public motivation to stop being only white. Every body, a new body. Every breath, recognition that it was first breathed by God and will be again. Everywhere, a new pair for everything that moves, breathes, whistles, chortles, weeps, wails, keys, calls, burbles, blares, screams, dares, flares its nostrils and leaps, or just simply brings fruit. This is the acceptable year. Anything less is just a waste of time.
Please pray with me. God of all possibility, God of children, God of life, we ask that you would use all of these things that have been offered with faithfulness, hope, wisdom, and joy, and you would use us to help create something new, something old, something good, something just. We ask this in all the names through which love is embodied and in the beautiful and strong name of Jesus. Amen.